Okay, it is a windy but warm day in the East Nook of Fife today. After a long stretch of no rain, we've finally gotten some nice rain in the area. Everything's looking a little bit greener. It's still been really nice and warm. We've actually hit the very rare situation in Scotland where it's been too warm on a few days. We need to get rid of all the heavy duvets and everything and actually just sleep with some sheets. Anyway, my conversation today is with Clif Harski. So Clif is someone who's been in and around the fitness industry for almost 20 years now. He's got great experience as a teacher, a trainer, as a coach, as an athlete, as, I guess, an entrepreneur in some ways, and also someone who has a lot of experience managing different facets within the fitness industry. So again, he's worked as a manager, he's worked up at the corporate level, and he's someone who's really been a part of some of the interesting movements that have happened within the industry over the last 15 or so years. He's been a part of Animal Flow, Spartan. He's been a part of various kettlebell organizations. He helped develop some of the early curriculum for MovNat. So he was right there at the beginning of the whole natural movement scene. And he's someone I want to get on just because he is someone who really has great perspective. And what I mean is he has been a part of so many different movements, and he's been very agile in the way that he decides to hold on to or to get rid of ideas that are or aren't useful. So he's not someone who's tied into dogmatic belief, and he's someone who's really willing to question why we do things. He's currently working as the Chief Operating Officer for PPSC, which is Pain-Free Performance Specialist Certification, and that's a nice holistic kettlebell certification where they really interrogate all the different ways that we can use kettlebells. They've really gotten away from a lot of the orthodoxy and how kettlebells are supposed to be used. And we talk about that in the conversation, this idea that there are prescribed specific ways that we are supposed to use certain tools as outlined by organizations versus actually working with the tool, figuring out what works for you. Because he's got such a broad background, Clif has a lot of insight in terms of meeting people where they are when it comes to health and fitness, identifying what's useful and discarding what isn't. He is a really funny guy. I laugh quite a lot during our conversation, and he's really irreverent. So even though he's someone who's sort of been in the belly of the beast for a while, he's also someone who can really cast a critical eye to some of the excesses of fitness trends. This is a really good conversation. I really enjoyed it. Even if you think you're someone who's not interested in the inside baseball of the fitness industry and the trends within the industry, I think there's a lot of insight there. He makes some very good observations, and he changes my mind on a few things over the course of the conversation. So give it a go, and I think you'll get something out of it.
How to stand on shifting sand. How to bend but stay intact.
Okay, today I've got Clif Harski. Clif is someone who's been in the fitness sector, in the movement sector, gyms for a long, long time. I think we're about a similar age. I'm 41 now, and I think Clif, you're about the same?
42.
42. Okay. All right. Well, so I'm a little younger. There we go. And, I've known of Clif for a while because he's been in so many different facets of the fitness industry for a while. But I really want to get him on because I re-listened to a interview you did with Rafe Kelly last year. And I just thought you had some really thoughtful things to say about your experience in the industry, sort of different fads and trends and movements and counter movements. And you touched on all kinds of things. You had a really good conversation on quantification and people sort of sometimes losing the forest through the trees on trying to over quantify things. And anyway, I just thought I really need to get Clif on because he's just got great experience in this. So a lot of our audience might not know you because we're in the UK predominantly, and we have a lot of people in the health sector. So they might not really be familiar with what you do. So I was just wondering if you could do a brief intro, talk about how you got started in the industry, maybe some of the organizations you've been a part of, and sort of what you're doing nowadays.
My pleasure. So I went to school for exercise science, kinesiology, and I did that while I was playing collegiate basketball. So I always knew that I wanted to do something fitness related. I can distinctly remember my final year making a pros and cons list of continuing to work as a Trader Joe's manager, which is a yuppie grocery store.
Yeah.
or moving to Argentina and starting my personal training business in the parks, like the personal trainers I saw when I was visiting Argentina.
Yeah.
And then they promoted me further. So I just stayed with Trader Joe's for a few years, which was really a good choice because it afforded me the opportunity to do personal training on the side while I had a steady income.
Yeah.
And it also gave me what I think is the best start in the fitness career that anybody could have, which is I wasn't immediately 100% in it and thrust into picking what my niche is. Instead, I got to be a client at a bunch of different spots. So I was a client of Pilates, of yoga, of CrossFit, of both like machine Pilates, the reformer, still early over here, reformer or mat based. And so what I would do is like 4 to 8 week experiments where I would just be a client and see how it affected my game of basketball. Did I feel better? Did I feel worse? Did I feel the same? So that's way back in the early 2000s. I graduated in 2005. So I was doing these experiments during school and for the couple years after. After that is when I decided, hey, I'm going to go full tilt. While I was working as a manager in Trader Joe's, I said, I got my little boot camp business on the side, teaching 6 to 8 classes a week in the park. I'm in San Diego, California, so the weather's perfect all year round. Small clientele list in the gym. I have a couple of personal training clients because I'm the goofy white guy in the gym that can dunk. I'm wearing headbands, short shorts, striped socks, wristbands, get a lot of attention when you're a 6'1" white guy dunking. Yeah. And so I would train athletes in the gym in a one-to-one setting there. Finally, it came to head 2010. Trader Joe's threatens me with putting me in charge of an entire store. And I say, I don't need to be wearing a Hawaiian shirt that many hours right now. I'm 27. So 28 maybe. So I quit, I stepped down and I went all the way in on transitioning from Trader Joe's supermarket store manager, part-time fitness guy to full-time fitness guy. I got a bunch of different certs that year. Don't need to list them all, but the ones that made the biggest impact on where I was moving would have been 3 different CrossFit certs. CrossFit, CrossFit football, CrossFit mobility. And I went to this retreat in West Virginia that Erwan LaCour of MovNat was teaching because I heard about it from Steve Maxwell, who's like one of the OG kettlebell guys. He came through my line at Trader Joe's in Point Loma and told me that he had just got back. And I knew who Erwan was because of listening to the Rob Wolf Paleo Solution podcast, reading about Erwan and Born to Run and Men's Health. And so I went home that afternoon, saw there's 1 ticket left, bought it, went out there, had a very nice experience while I was out there, hit it off with Erwan. He's a mystical dude. He and I have the same birthday. And I think that he looked up at the stars and was like, this is destiny. He's supposed to teach something like that. And so I proposed that I teach his courses. So I put myself out there, which, is if you want anything to happen, you kind of got to make it happen. So I proposed that I teach his courses, and I got lucky that he said, let's try it out. He came to San Diego. I co-taught. I went to Thailand. I trained with him and Vic Verdier, however you say his French name.
I would have been in Thailand at that time. I remember when that one was happening with Vic Verdier, not sure.
Yep. Yeah, that was 2011, January. So I spent a few weeks out there for on-the-job training. And when I came back, I hit the ground running in March. And for a 14-month period, I led 88 MovNat workshops.
Wow.
So I came up with the schedule, plan of attack. I took the curriculum that Erwan had, and Erwan knows his stuff better than anybody because it's his stuff.
Yeah.
But he's a very free-flowing, non-traditional education guy. And for me to take somebody else's content, I needed to systemize it.
Yes.
So that's just how my brain works. And I was like, well, I'm going to need to go in this order. I need to look for these things at the parks that I'm going to go teach at. So I systemized it and taught that. And fortunately for me, it put me in a great position to meet a bunch of different people within the industry. And the MovNat audience was a very interesting audience because you had a lot of chiros, PTs, and trainers and paleo people because the biggest audience at that moment was Rob Wolf's Paleo Solution.
Yep.
But you also had the clients of those things that like barefoot running, that like CrossFit, that like paleo. And so they would come. They're all in, right? All you had to do most of the time when you're teaching, all you have to do is not screw it up because they're bought in to come and see you. So I got to teach that and make some good connections. I left that for various different reasons. A year and a half in, basically, one of the biggest reasons was I had suffered 2 injuries in my time. Maybe it was because of all the flights and radiation and chasing big weights. But I had to get a knee surgery because I had a bone bruise on the femoral medial condyle. I had a shoulder surgery because I had a torn labrum from missing a 165-pound barbell get up. And did it on the right, missed it on the left. And so I moved back home. From that point, I became a free agent on the education wire. And I started teaching. I got picked up, I say, by Animal Flow and a company called Kettlebell Athletics, as well as taught a couple little things for FMS, very, very minimal there. And then also taught Spartan group, not Spartan group, but Spartan race obstacle course specialist, a handful of those. Those education things, I would be teaching 2 a month from 2012 until 2020. So that's quite a bit of certifications to teach. And then to the other extent is when I moved back, I restarted my boot camp. I called it booty camp because it was all kettlebells and attracting clients that train for aesthetics, which is still the number one reason people train. And I was working at a one-on-one setting in a big box gym. And then I got fortunate in being with the connections, this startup called Fitwall, well-funded boutique, bougie group fitness studio, wanted to start a franchise. They weren't going to be a franchise, but a chain. And I came in and I was outspoken on what I thought they should do as far as time of the workout, what they need to do, use the equipment. And fortunately, they put me in a position to have a full-time role with insurance. And in fitness, if you can have a salary with insurance, that's a nice way to be. I also looked at it as a huge opportunity to start a company that I'm not paying for. And so we built up to 7 facilities. We had a lot of good success, built our own heart rate monitoring software, had a very unique situation compared to other people. And that gave me a lot of insight because I was managing 2,100 members per month on a monthly recurring basis, which for the clubs were drivable from my house. So I would be teaching multiple classes every single day and seeing how this stuff works. So that's my background. Like really coaching a lot of people, coaching a lot of coaches, and those 2 things give you the opportunity to have to customize how you talk to the client in front of you, because coaching coaches is much different than coaching clients that are there for general fitness. So that means I got to play a lot with things like Animal Flow and MovNat, which is very movement centric, things like kettlebells, sandbags, which I would determine to be somewhere between movement and sport because it's very skill based movement. And then just general fitness, which is health or aesthetic forward fitness.
So what are you doing now?
So now, that's a good point. So in 2020, COVID said, hey, close all your studios. And I was presented with the opportunity, a guy named Dr. John Russin, who has a pretty large following on the social media, ex-physical therapist, strength coach now. In 2018, he asked me to coach his certification. And I said, I don't have the time, too busy. But I went. It was really good material. I'm not one to pass up good opportunities. So I taught it for 2019. And in 2020, as we were closing, he asked if I'd like to come over and run his education company. And I said, yes, let's do that. Since COVID had killed everything else. And so I came aboard. And since then, we've expanded the one certification called Pain-Free Performance Specialist Certification, which is built around the idea of moving away from an overly corrective strategy, right? The industry started to want to be physical therapists. And it's like, what's actually good is fitness and getting strong. my job as COO was, all right, well, we got all these people. Like, how do we continue to make more money while helping more people? And the answer was, we can have other courses. Our team is really well experienced and had a lot of success and very smart, so we can build different things. One of them is I built our kettlebell course because I play with kettlebells a lot.
Yeah.
And I look at the kettlebell as a great tool to explore athletic movement. And I think that's good for people. It's one of the 6 characteristics in our newest course that we think every human needs to be training is athleticism. And so this last year we ran 135 courses.
Wow.
I managed those. I taught one a month. And this coming year, I'm just going to sit at my desk and send my trainers everywhere and not travel and coach much anymore. And I still coach classes every week because I think that gives me credibility and keeps me sharp.
It's interesting. One of the things I always say is that any job past a certain level turns into a management and an email job. And it's funny with the Trader Joe's thing, because I was in a similar spot at a similar age where, I was asked to do some management work while I was still doing half fitness, and I did about a year and a half of management stuff, and I just realized that I just wasn't I wasn't cut out for it. I was thinking the Peter principle. People always get promoted up to the point where they're no longer effective in an organization. And it's like, I was a pretty good teacher, but I'm not good at running a school. You said a lot of good stuff in here, and there's a few directions I want to go into. So I had some questions that I'll get back to, but I just want to respond to a few of the things that you said. One of the things you said was interesting when you were talking about working under pain-free, is moving away from this sort of corrective, and maybe I misunderstand you, but maybe also prescriptive model. I'm not sure, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot as well. Cause I remember maybe it peaked around 2015, 2016, but every personal trainer also wanted to pretend to be a physio for a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And there are a lot of certs going on, a lot of prehab. This is probably the height, and no offense to him, because he's someone I have respect for, but it's probably also the height of the Kelly Starrett era of, mobility WOD, kind of, spending all the time in the self-myofascial release and the bands and everything like that, which is something I still do because that's when I came up in that period, and that's kind of what I've internalized. But I'd like to know what you mean when you say moving away from the sort of the corrective stuff, because that sounds really interesting.
So, for instance, domestically here, obviously we've got the NASM with the corrective exercise specialist emphasis. Their entire OPT model comes around like, look at this complicated overhead squat, and then I'm going to tell you that you have upper cross, lower cross, etc. You have the FMS, you had Kelly, and then there's Brook Bush Institute. You have so many different types where you come up with screens and assessments that are putting people in relatively arbitrary positions that they would never exercise in and they would never use in life. And then we try to come up with all the reasons that they suck at moving and what their prescription is to fix them.
Yes.
And this is taught oftentimes in a 2-day certification. Meanwhile, physios, physical therapists, chiropractors go to school for 4 years or however long, spend tons of clinical hours and are trying to get better all the time. And we're like, no, we're a personal trainer. Trust me, I got you after this weekend. So I understand. I think the sentiment why we want to do that is part of it is we want to make what we do more meaningful. And unfortunately, the fitness industry, people will say things like, hey, when are you going to get a real job? Like because they don't look at it as a real career, because people don't value fitness and coaching and guidance there like they would the expertise someone has to fix a motor in a car. However, most people don't know what the hell they're doing in the gym. So the expertise is there, but we internalize this disrespect that we feel. And so we might want to try to make what we do more meaningful by ascribing more value, by trying to make it more complicated. And so we also might think it's a good way to sell to people because it makes them dependent on us, or we sound smarter to them. And I think that's all unfortunate route that we went. Part of it is also people were, the educators like myself, that's what was being sold. And if you're in there and you're being told it's important, it's being pushed for CEUs and it's being pushed by organizations, then it's gonna find its way into being important. But that pendulum in fitness. It swung so far over to corrective that you would just see these sessions where people
Yes.
are doing corrective exercise for 40 minutes
Yep.
and then not lifting weights because they're worried about form being perfect. And then they don't get any fitness results. They might feel
Yeah.
okay, but that's because they're not loading. They're not doing anything. They're just tickling themselves and blowing in a straw during their session.
Yes.
And they had no benefit. So what we're doing is like, yeah, there's good things to glean from the corrective strategy. Like you might have to spend some extra time on body parts or certain patterns that don't work the way you want them to. But really what's useful is losing some weight, improving your cardiovascular health, and getting stronger.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the other stuff takes care of itself.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Especially if you're sort of giving your body that wide spectrum of stimulus, because when I was coming into it, it was kind of like the peak of starting strength, as one of those ways of being, I'm into fitness, and I just do like a sort of powerlifting inspired routine. And, all you need to do is squat, deadlift, press, and you'll be fine. And, at the end of that, I think people realize, well, I'm not actually moving as well as I hoped I'd be. And I also don't really look the way I hoped I would. Um, but it is nice that actually I think all these conversations have happened because now we have so many more options for how people want to train. I want to pick up on one more thing you said before I go back to some other questions, which you were talking about these 6 characteristics.
Yep.
And actually, I did want to talk to you about the way you use the word athleticism because I came out of CrossFit as well, and I remember one of the things is you always called the members athletes. And to me, that ended up feeling very loaded, especially when the CrossFit Games came around and everyone wanted to pretend that they were training for the CrossFit Games. And for me personally, I feel like CrossFit lost a lot of what appealed to me initially when it sort of became so contorted around everyone pretending they were training for the CrossFit Games. And I think the way you use athleticism is different, and I think it's very good, and it's a sort of a concept that I think a lot of people might not be familiar with. So I was wondering if you talk about when you say athletic, what do you mean, and can you just sort of give some examples?
Yeah. And let me give you all 6 of those characteristics so
Please do,
it
yeah.
fits in. So we say, and this is our newest cert, it's called lifelong performance.
Mm.
And we think that these 6 characteristics need to be trained for every person. Now, in different varying amounts, of course, based on their experience and where they're at, but strength first and foremost, because it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
the foundation of all the things. Hypertrophy, because having more muscle mass as you age, outside of freak show amounts, like myself, and power, because you have to be able to move fast.
Yep.
Then mobility, because it's nice to be able to scratch your back and put on your own shoes. Then conditioning, which is part and parcel of cardio. However, in our certification, we talk conditioning because we're talking training sessions. And I don't think we need to be training people through true aerobic cardio training. Like, go do that on your own. Go for a hike and do a run, but don't pay me to babysit.
Yeah.
And then the last one is athleticism. And athleticism, we think is distinct from power. Power is one element of athleticism, but athleticism is moving in different directions. It's twisting, it's turning, it's coordination, it's timing, it's skill, and it's like at the end of it, the peak is reactivity.
Mm.
So you think about sport, that's peak athleticism. I have to respond to what you do on the court, what the rules inside of the lines of the field. Now, in the S&C carryover to the fitness world for athleticism, you get the condescending young people that will say, well, if you want to do that, just go play a sport, which is just, it's unfortunately unrealistic. Like, I'm 42, I have a torn meniscus. If I don't have time to go do that because I got 2 little boys, my wife would be mad. Like, hey, you watch them while I go play. No, that's not going to work. Also, if I get hurt, because sport is unpredictable
Mm-hmm.
and it is a higher risk of injury, I can't afford to do that with my work schedule and playing with the boys. But what I can do is I can set up my training sessions to include elements of athleticism. That means jumping sideways, change of direction. It means, so for our lower body, we talk about change of direction and moving locomotively in multiple directions at different paces, including explosively. For upper body, we talk about tool manipulation. So throwing things, mace, club, kettlebell, Olympic barbell. And we just think people need to have an exposure to these athletic qualities as part of their training because it's good for them, number one, but also number two, a lot of times it gives them the opportunity to really enjoy movement because it's not as output centric. It's
Yep.
more experiential as you do it. Like sets and reps with 3x10 for hypertrophy is output centric. Like, did I get bigger? It's not necessarily super enjoyable. Even like cardiorespiratory fitness output. Like, hey, I spent 19 minutes in my zone 2 today instead of 18. And it's like, all right, cool. That's boring. But like you get better at a skill, whatever that is that's interesting to you, that is awesome. That's why things like Animal Flow and MovNat and Olympic weightlifting, I think have a stickier nature to them when people find something they enjoy. Dance, Zumba, like all of these things are way more interesting to humans, I think.
That's a good segue into the next thing I sort of wanted to talk about anyway. I mean, I did kind of want to talk about in your experience, I think you've seen a lot of trends, you've seen a lot of fads go back and forth. But, one of the things that I think is interesting is, you were really instrumental, I think, sometimes directly, sometimes on the periphery, being a part of Animal Flow, being a part of MovNat. I think in a lot of ways you were there where we kind of set the stage for some of the stuff that came after or those emerging at the same time. There's kind of this really exciting period in the late 2000s, early 2010s where people were just throwing out new ideas and people were synthesizing things. And, obviously, you kind of have the peak of CrossFit again, somewhere maybe around 2014, 2015. But then you also have like Ido Portal coming out and all his followers and the whole movement culture thing, which was a reaction to traditional fitness and CrossFit. And obviously you got MovNat, which always struck me as, in a way, a reaction to CrossFit and just taking some of the ideas and moving them in a different setting. So, in the questions I gave, there's that Mike, it's not originally Mike Boyle, but I think people attribute to him, is that essentially any industry, in this case, the fitness industry, tends to overreact in the short term and then underreact in the long term. When foam rollers came out, everyone was doing foam rolling. When mobility became a big thing, where I'm going with this, when everyone was using kettlebells, etc. So we've kind of had these high water marks, these low water marks, these, reactions, counter reactions, the pendulums swung back and forth. I was just kind of wondering about what are some of the trends you've seen that, all right, well, you used to do, but maybe you're a little bit embarrassed by, but what are also some of the things you've kind of come full circle on? What are some of the things that over whatever, the years you've been here that you've kind of, either cast aside or you come back again now in your 40s and realize actually maybe we had that right? What are some things you were right about? What are some things you're wrong about?
So I think, right, like if we start in the 90s, everything was bodybuilding.
Yes.
Now, it's also before my time a little bit, right? So there might have been some other stuff that I don't know about. Like I wasn't familiar with sports training in that time and what they were doing. But generally speaking, from a fitness standpoint, it was like bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Look like Van Damme, look like Arnold, and that's everything. So the pushback, the pendulum from there, I believe, and because powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting was not at the forefront of people's mindset. That happened because of CrossFit.
Yes.
And that's a good thing. But that's late. That's 2010, 2012, 14, 15 is the spillover like you're talking about. But in the early 2000s, the pushback to bodybuilding culture was that it wasn't functional.
Yes.
And so people did functional training. We're talking Paul Chek, we're talking bands, Bosu. And there's a lot of really good stuff there. Obviously, you can go too far where you're standing on one foot on an upside down Bosu ball, shaking a body blade and like whatever. But the idea, I don't like that the term functional is poo-pooed these days because the idea is sound. Yes, it becomes a sales tool and it loses some of its value. But the idea that, hey, maybe instead of only training for aesthetics, and I don't want to demonize that, but maybe instead of only training for aesthetics, we also want to be stronger in different positions and be able to maintain some semblance of movement competency in various ways so that we feel better in life. Because if you exclusively, like you gave the example of starting strength and you started to feel maybe like a little bit stiff. Yeah, if you exclusively do something, then you might be ignoring other characteristics, which is why we say we need all 6 of those. And so you went to functional. And I think that the functional bit, the pushback from there, plus the continued pushback to bodybuilding, led us to something like CrossFit, which was the biggest movement. I think the biggest noise change in the last 20 years, is CrossFit.
Easy.
And so that exposed people to an idea of functional fitness not being little bands and PT looking type exercises, but instead big ass, explosive, athletic movement. And that exposed them to barbells. And so people learned Oli lifting and powerlifting. And so as a trickle down of CrossFit, then starting strength and powerlifting became much more entrenched into the field, to the point where like even I was starting to chase big, heavy lifts. And that's not really my thing, because my measure of success in the gym has always been, how does it make me feel on the basketball court? And so I can tell you right now, like, doing more heavy lifting did not make me feel better on the basketball court. And that's an N of 1, but I also hang out with a lot of basketball players. And it is a fairly common thing that they don't feel a ton better if they are doing mostly powerlifting and bodybuilding. So you had this pushback from frilly little functional and bodybuilding, still wanted to be at like functional, CrossFit, weightlifting, powerlifting. CrossFit also gave more exposure to the kettlebell. That had a proliferation with RKC and Strong First in the early 2010s. And then, that all, I think, led to some other stuff that we're seeing right now, which is probably peaking now, is this idea of athlete training. Train like an athlete, hybrid training, where I mock it, because that's just what I do, is I mock everything, is people are like, I'm going to sprint, I'm an athlete. I'm a jog now, I'm a hybrid athlete. I do a couple box jumps, I'm an athlete. And I love that people are doing that. But I don't think that to me, athlete is multi-directional, right? Like multiple things, not just output driven. Like, oh yeah, you have a flying 10 that's a little bit faster. That's awesome. So I'm not diminishing it, but I mean, kind of I am. And so that pendulum, CrossFit obviously fell back because it was just probably too intense for most people. They chased the games like you were talking about, instead of 90% of their clients, which were general fitness. Functional training, I think, isn't ever going to come back in the way that it was big in the early 2000s, because it didn't drive enough fitness outcomes. But I think that morphed into the corrective exercise piece. And I think there will always be a portion of the corrective exercise that's understood as like, this is valuable for certain people at certain times, but it shouldn't be the show. I think the piece that's coming back the most right now is bodybuilding. And it was demonized for so long that now the young kids that are coming in are like, what's sick is having big biceps and pecs. And I'm like, you're right. That is awesome. So funny enough, like the counterculture for 20 years was anti-bodybuilding, but now the youth, that is our trainers now that I'm training, are like, oh, counterculture is bodybuilding, because it's long enough for that to have happened. So we're just kind of like,
that's funny to think about. It's, now, like, again, I'm in my 40s, and I'm not really on social media, and it is funny, like, thinking about, I was talking to Rafe Kelly about this the other day, like how the diet, of how people get their fitness information now is so different, because I grew up in the time of message boards and blogs and stuff like that. And like, then you started getting stuff on videos and oh man, I thought I was snatching a barbell. Now I've seen what a real snatch looks like, and I realized I got no idea, and kind of coming up with that, where it's interesting now, because obviously so many people, especially the young kids, they're getting it through TikTok or Instagram, and the culture is just so different. You're right. What they're reacting against and what they see is just, it's just, just a whole different generational thing that I can't wrap my head around. I mean, good for them, change is inevitable.
Man, so in the 2010s, I used to, because I'm so squarely in the movement functional crowd, like with what I do, but I would be encouraging people all the time. Like, if you've never spent 6 months on a bodybuilding split, you are
Mm-hmm.
missing out in the joy of
Yep.
life of like a
Yeah.
chest day is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Also, I promise you'll put on more muscle doing it that way because that's what it's built for.
That's what it does. Yeah. You're gonna get the best results when you hang out with the people who do that. Bodybuilders will show you how to make big muscle.
That's it.
One of the things I want to talk about, kind of baked into the last question or the previous question, was so. Yeah, you had this good conversation with Rafe on the interview where you were talking about the tension between, I think, what he called the romantic and the classical, and I think he called romantic and practical, in terms of, I guess, from your point of view, especially having that kind of management background, is what works, what's actually viable as a model versus all these sort of big romantic ideas. And it's one of the things with, natural movement. It's been around for a while. Movement culture has been around for a while, but in a lot of ways, except for weird parts of the internet, it doesn't seem like it's gone mainstream. And that could be due to lack of interest, lack of, market preference, whatever. But I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what you mean when you talk about practical versus romantic, and kind of what are some of the limitations, like, that maybe the fitness industry has in terms of changing the world or changing the way people think.
Yeah, and so that stemmed from, I believe I said it at some point, maybe even to Erwan. I can't recall because it's so long ago now, but
Yeah.
I would describe the methodology and the premise behind MovNat that we should go outside and interact in, whether it be nature or just environments that we don't have exposure to, and are we able to
Mhm.
manage those environments? And I think that is a great goal, but I also think that it's relatively unrealistic for
Yeah.
most adults. If you live in a city in New York, I guess you can go to Central Park,
Mm.
but like what months of the year can you go to Central Park?
Yeah.
You're limiting yourself to what you can actually even do. So you see, if like you even see the final boss of MovNat is then they created equipment to put inside, which
Yes.
is just doing parkour or Ninja
Yeah.
Warrior. Right? It's full circle, because if you actually want to be able to reach people, you got to go to where it is indeed practical, which is comical because that's one of the things that we would teach at MovNat is like, oh, you have gym strength, but do you have practical strength in
Yeah.
order to climb up on this tree? And I'm like, that's a cool, like theoretical, romantic idea. But how many people do you know that have ever had to jump up, grab a branch, and climb on top of a tree?
Yeah.
All right, like it just doesn't happen terribly often.
Right.
More practical is just odd object lifting, so that when
Yeah.
you are moving your furniture, you know how to do it. Now it's that,
Yeah.
and that's baked into MovNat. So I'm not disparaging MovNat when I'm talking about this, but the it really hits home, or it tickles the fancy of somebody that has the ability to go outside and explore and enjoy that. But that's no different than someone that has the ability to pay for tango lessons or pay
Hmm.
for kettlebell lessons. We all are just kind of looking for the thing that resonates with us.
Yeah.
And it's a much smaller percentage of people that getting dirty and uncomfortable and going outside and challenging your comfort zone. There's not that many people that do that.
Yeah.
And so those that love it, they probably love it partly because they feel like a special individual for doing different things than everybody else,
Hmm.
right? Like we all want our own little identity. Some of us really do like it. Some of us like it for a time, and then eventually we're like, damn it, I got bit by like a bunch of fire ants in
Yeah.
Houston while teaching this course, and I have welts, which happened to me. Um,
Yeah. I know those ants too. They leave those little sort of like
God,
pussy
unbelievable.
wounds. Yeah, they
Just,
suck.
yeah, my ankle was destroyed.
Yeah.
Um, I got bit by so many hornets and wasps teaching. So great times, and
Yeah.
really, I think it is valuable. I'm looking over here because Comfort Crisis with Michael Easter, like good
Hmm.
book,
Yeah.
and training like MovNat, honestly, training hard is part of getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So that's why I mean by romantic. And like separately, the idea that these young buck, 26-year-old single bros that are
Mhm.
S&C coaches, when they tell people just lift heavy because if you want to do athletic stuff, play sport. I'm like, that is irresponsible to tell me as 42, not me, but like a
Yeah.
42-year-old that hasn't done athletic stuff in 20 years to go play soccer. They're going to blow their ACL
Yeah.
or Achilles or
Exactly.
groin. And that's a romantic idea. It's just a naive, inexperienced idea by an overly cocky young kid in the industry. And that, to me, that's romantic. Like playing sports, it's a fantastic goal. MovNat, going outside and doing exploratory climbing, lifting random stuff. Awesome goal. If you can do it, I think it's rad. Parkour, my wife does American Ninja Warrior. I'm nervous every time she runs up the damn warp wall because, she just turned 40. And unfortunately, like, that's a thing that happens is people get hurt with their Achilles and stuff when they're chasing crazy stuff. And I'm not here to dissuade people from chasing goals, but also be realistic. And so a lot of these instances, like these things, are romantic goals that aren't terribly practical. And we live within our own teeny tiny little bubble of people that like fitness and like these types of things.
Yeah.
And so we forget that when you go to the grocery store and there's 100 people, 98 of them have never heard of a kettlebell or CrossFit or anything. And they think squatting is dangerous because that's their exposure.
Yep.
So we get really caught up in this self-congratulatory, holier than thou, condescending world that we live in. But that limits our ability to reach more people. And that's where I go with the practical. I'm like, all right, well, how do we get them in here? And the way that I've always talked about what I hope to be doing for general fitness people is to give them fitness gummy vitamins. I'm like, hey, here's a Flintstone candy, son.
Yeah.
Ha, tricked you. There's a bunch of vitamins in there that you weren't going to have otherwise. And that's for you, like end user, general client, general human on earth that just needs to be fitter. That's a different client base than the I live, breathe fitness, or I'm a coach. And I get confused sometimes because I'm straddling both. And now my clients are coaches. So I'm more into, this is why you do it this way, because it's enjoyable. But when I had my 7 studios, the first year was a huge learning curve of me going, oh, this isn't who I've been hanging out with that love movement. This is just regular ass people. I got to talk their language. And so I got better at talking their language and understanding there's a vast difference between those two. And a lot of people, especially, and I think it's as bad as ever now, because on social media, we get caught up in our own little circles of self-congratulatory fitness people. And then we lose track of the end user. And if that's your target audience, then you might get confused and not be doing yourself any service.
That's good. I've got a couple follow-ups. I'm going to say them out loud so I don't forget them, so we can go back to them. I do want to talk about kettlebells and the way that you train kettlebells and sort of the way that people imagine kettlebells as a tool and what a kettlebell is supposed to be used for. I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about social media and just what it takes to be a social media presence and playing the game. But then just based on what you were saying before, I just want to throw something out here. So I've worked in gym settings. I kind of I don't really work in the fitness industry specifically anymore, but I'm adjacent to it, and obviously it's been very good to you. At the same time, I always criticize the worst excesses of what I see in the fitness industry, just because it's just how the algorithm works. How what people want. People always want the goofiest, most extreme version of something, and that's often what filters to the top. But like, imagine you can go back 100 years, 100 years. And for some reason you have like $1 billion, you're some rich philanthropist, and you can radically change the infrastructure and the conversation of the US, of the West, of the way people look at movement, fitness, physical activity, whatever. Do you think that there's another way of doing things? Or do you think that ultimately, like the way we live today, the solution is we're always gonna reconverge on gyms as we have them now?
I think it would probably ultimately reconverge on gyms. Now, what I would do is I would invest as much money as possible ever into somehow redoing physical fitness for the youth in schools and making it a significantly larger portion of what they do. Like, it wouldn't be, I love sports. It wouldn't be sports. It'd be more play, exploration, parkour, American Ninja Warrior, all these different type of things. And it would have more options for them to self-select what is interesting to them. If they want to go do dance, go do dance. This might lead into like gender stereotypes of movement selection. I don't care. Like whatever it is that you want to do, go do those things. Because right now, like my kid has PE twice a week.
Me too.
I had it every day when I was growing up.
Me too.
And so you look at, I'm like, when I visit the kids, I'm like, wow, these 7-year-olds don't move. Like now my kids are the opposite, right? Yeah. Like I'm like, can you guys calm down, please? But we foster that. We set the example. So I would redo youth as best as possible, because if it's set up where that you're enjoying it and it's part of what you do, how you identify, you'll probably sustain that going into adulthood.
Yeah.
When you identify as someone that doesn't work out and doesn't like it for whatever reason, it's hard to change how you self-identify. Yeah. And that's the biggest piece of my clients when they came in is they're like, I don't work out. I have to work out.
Yeah.
My doctor said I have to. And it's all framed in their head as like a punishment, a chore, a task.
Yeah.
And for me, I go, no, I work out is what I do.
Yeah.
Right. And so if that would be my number one purpose is like, hey, how do we get people to identify as someone that is a mover? And at that point, maybe more adult sport leagues is realistic because they never stopped. Mm-hmm. Like I played basketball till I was 37. And I saw my dad playing basketball till he was in his mid 40s, right? Like this was the norm. So that would be my goal with that $1 billion, et cetera.
Yeah. No, I think the same way. It's like if you can instill that love of movement, or just get people, to change that narrative about like, I don't move. You're right. It's so much easier to maintain that stuff once you've developed it as kids, to try to come back and talk to people in their 40s and get them to try to change the script. And it's possible. And I think playing devil's advocate, I know so many people who had horrible experiences in PE growing up, because it's like being last pick for the dodgeball team and eating a ball in the face over and over and over again. Those kind of memories. So I think your point about giving people options to move in ways that are meaningful for them, like you said, whether it's dance, whether it's parkour classes, whatever, that makes a lot of sense to me. I do want to talk about kettlebells, because we use kettlebells as well. And I think sometimes it always surprises people, because they're like, oh, you're outside. I thought, you're just going to be climbing trees or rolling around the grass. I'm like, no, the kettlebell is a great tool. Like if you want to, put some things in the trunk of a car and, provide people with all this interesting stimulus, it's really hard to beat kettlebells. But it's also interesting because I think there was a sort of narrative around kettlebells, especially when they were first introduced in the States, that this is what you use a kettlebell for. Kettlebell for is used for A, B, and C, and this is what the swing looks like. And obviously there's some debates in CrossFit and, RKC or Strong First or whoever, but really that was all still sagittal plane stuff. It was just about range of motion. So I just want to talk a little bit about how you use kettlebells, kind of what your philosophy is, and maybe where some mistakes that you think other organizations or people, some assumptions that they make in the limitations of kettlebells.
Yeah, my pleasure. So in the United States, the number one way to use a kettlebell is still from the hard style lens of RKC and Strong First, which was set up as honestly, it was a marketing positioning way to differentiate how to use the kettlebell different than the kettlebell sport. Mm-hmm. Right. And part of that was they created their own different shape kettlebell, the cast iron bell, to the tune of, and I'm sort of playing telephone here, but I think it's right. They sold a 16K, a 24K, and eventually a 32K. And so they even told you that the best way to progress is to get really good at one until you could do the next one, which is objectively incorrect. The best way to progress would be small improvements, like a 16K, a 17K, a 18K, and move up. Because no other tool on earth would you ever say, I'll tell you what, we're going to do a 50% jump on your Olympic weightlifting. Don't ever go higher until you can make that jump. That was just a way to sell the damn exercise equipment. Genius to an extent, right?
That's funny. I hadn't thought about that, how it was framed in that, because I already remember, when Pavel was talking about that step progression, I'm like, oh, that's cool because you're getting different levels of volume versus intensity, and you build up your volume. It's like a built-in periodization. But now you mentioned it, of course, it was like tied to whatever, like the weight of the pood or something like that. So it makes sense. You backtrack the logic.
Well, and so like when I had my studios at Fitwall, we had no free weights, we had no kettlebells, we had no dumbbells for the first 4 years. I had bands, I had body weight, I had TRX. So I was like, all right, well, I'm tasked with overloading people. How do you do that? All right, if you only have 2 kettlebells, how do you do that? All right, so
Mm-hmm.
they had to backfill. They had to create the methodology, and the methodology works. Like I don't want anybody to get twisted. I think the way that they teach it to do it with those 2 weights, and that's awesome. Like really smart, and it objectively works. It is also fair to say it would be better to have more kettlebells. Now, it may not be realistic for people's budgets or space, but it would still be better. So that's that piece with kettlebells. It was hardstyle. Then overseas, internationally, Europe specifically, it's kettlebell sport. Both are as dogmatic and anti doing anything differently with the kettlebell because they're like, it is supposed to be for this. I'm of the church of sport. I'm of the church of hardstyle. And that's just foolish. All right. We see the same thing with the barbell.
Mm-hmm.
It's for Olympic weightlifting. It's for powerlifting. How dare you turn it on your side and do landmine stuff? Well,
Yeah.
it's literally it's an inanimate,
Mm-hmm.
non-emotional piece of metal, and
Yeah.
how I choose to use it only puts a load on the body. And if I put a load on the body in a different way, it has a different effect.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's
If you
also interesting how this stuff got codified, because if you look back to the way people are using barbells and things, turn of the century, golden age strongmen, all the old lifts and, the asymmetric lifts, the side bend lifts, all that old, anyhow stuff. It's like, it is interesting how all this has become codified as dogma, where really it's just, the way history worked out.
they won. Like, those lifts won. And I think those lifts with the barbell won because those are the positions you can lift the most weight. And so it's the most impressive to people. And they go, oh, that's the most weight.
Yeah.
And that just, yes, that's true, but that doesn't take away the value of doing less weight on one leg because it actually
Yeah.
may be more weight per leg. So that's the barbell. With the kettlebell, the way that we've chosen to use it is to say, hey, there's not one way to swing it. There's not one way to clean it. There's not one way to snatch it. You can do this in a bunch of different positions. And that does 2 things. One, when I'm teaching people, if I have one option, I'm going to be wrong, or I'm going to have people that are unsuccessful at that one option, whether that be from a skill, injury history, whatever. And so if I have multiple options, I can help more people faster. That's the first thing. That's my first tenet is more people successful faster. They will enjoy it more, then they will have more results. The second thing is if I have more ways to do it, then I can progress you in different ways over time because no one ever won any money for doing a better hard style swing for more reps.
Mm-hmm.
But if you only do that, and I've seen this firsthand hundreds and hundreds of times, is you get good at that one thing and then you by default get actually less good at being able to do other stuff because your motor engram gets super duper deep and you can't get up and outside and do it differently. The people
Yeah.
that have the hardest time in our certifications are the hard style people because
Interesting.
they have squeezed every ounce of effort out of their butt cheeks and brain to do it that one hard style way and they can't adjust.
Yeah.
Um, so everything hard style was, when it started with RKC, John Duquesne is a marketer, and Pavel played the role of I'm the like crazy evil Russian and
Yeah.
squeeze comrade, squeeze. We're hard style. We tuck our shirts in. We wear khakis. We're playing military cosplay,
Yeah.
and that shtick. As I grew up around the world, like around military, I always found it kind of borderline offensive, but certainly laughable.
Mm.
But I understand why people like that hard dogmatic stance is because there's a certain learning style that's just like, tell me how to do it. Just tell me
Mm-hmm.
the way. And that works well for some people. And so objectively, the curriculum is fine. I don't think anything of it is necessarily wrong. I just found it to be incomplete. And so what we do is we go, the limitation of the kettlebell is that people are going to be limited on their loading of their lower body because of what they can handle in their hand or shoulder girdle or arm. Okay, take legs away.
Mm.
Change the loading of the eccentric, the speed of the eccentric, the directions. We can take and then we can get more out of the lower body. Cool. The tool itself, I think, helps shape like what you could do with it. Kettlebell is really good at unilateral loading and turning and moving it outside your center of mass. That's opposite of what hardstyle does. Hardstyle is like, let's go really rigid. Let's not twist. Let's not turn. Let's not rotate. Let's keep it tight because that allows us to handle more load in these bilateral lifts. And so my brain goes, so you think it's a barbell? Like, you're treating it like it's a barbell, but you're not taking advantage of the unique potential here. So that's all we're trying to do, is explore the unique potential of the tool. Because if you want to do fundamental bilateral lifts, use a better tool. You could handle more weight and get a better overload by just using the barbell. Another example would be this: the kettlebell swing, the basic swing, straight ahead, fantastic. You get a fast eccentric, you have to turn it around, there's amortization phase, there's power development, etc. Great. I will do one that's in a split stance, 45 degrees, right, out to the side. And traditionalists will look at that and be like, what are you doing? That's wrong. You can't do that. I'm like, you can create power this direction. Everything you like about the regular swing is the same here, just hitting the muscles different. And your inability to like have a flexible mind is limiting what you want or can do with this. And part of it is not, most people are lemmings. They want to fit in. They don't want to stand out or be judged. And we actually have a cool thing in kettlebells right now that happened because of COVID. In 2020, all the in-person certs stopped doing in-person certs. And so there was this 1 to 2 year void of people going through the indoctrination of that cert. And you had a lot more people, I call them the kettlebell COVID babies, who without access to the gym, they went and bought kettlebells and they started playing. And to your point, they started following other IG people and TikTok people. And you know what's more interesting than a hard style swing? Flow and juggle and all this other stuff. And that kind of caught fire within the industry. And you have more people. Part of it's counterculture. They don't want to go through the traditional thing. They were posting it. And then the old people would come in and be like, you're not allowed to do it that way. Get off my lawn. They're like, I don't know, man, I'm getting stronger than you doing it this way. And so it's really cool. Like, I've been going to this event called Bell Fest, where it's just kettlebell fest party. It's a party of kettlebells. And you see all these people doing things differently. And I'm finding like, yes, these are my people. Like, they're all open to doing it differently instead of traditional.
It's funny. I was so dismissive of the kettlebell flow and juggling stuff when it first came out, because I'm like, that's just a party trick sort of thing. And that's kind of a reflection of where I was at the time, because I think I was still focusing so much on output based. Well, you can move more weight, but it's interesting. As I get further and further away from that, it obviously strikes me as much more interesting. What kind of comments do people make when they see you do rotational swings and things like that? What are some of the top things, like the things you see on, I don't know, Instagram?
So less so now, but firstly, it used to be like, you can't handle as much weight. And my thing was like, yep, that's true. What else? Because that's not the goal. Number two is, you're going to hurt your back. And I'm like, no, I'm not, because of the fact that I've built up to be able to do this. So if anything, this gives me more protection. Those would be the number one and number two things. And like, you're not allowed to do it that way, because that's the language in most certs, is like, this is the allowed form.
Yeah. The reason I asked is because it's still going on, but it is interesting to see the sort of mechanistic McGill side of back pain models and things like that really being challenged by other models now. And I think the rotational stuff is so interesting, because it's, if I go on YouTube and I see anybody doing any kind of rotational swing, that's always gonna be one of the first or second comment is like, oh, you're gonna wear out your disc that way, you're gonna tweak your back. And to me, it feels like it might be one of those conversations that never goes away. I don't think either side is ever going to vanquish the other.
No, they won't. It'll always be there, because you're going to have somebody that gets hurt doing it.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like to that end, what are we going to do? Get rid of every exercise and movement that someone's ever had an injury? Because I've had somebody in a class doing a front plank and they're like, ow, my shoulder hurts. And I'm like, well, damn it. How did you hurt yourself in a front plank?
I ruptured my bicep tendon doing just a farmer's carry, just thoughtlessly, just grabbed a kettlebell, wrong angle, wasn't even heavy, just
That's wrong day, wrong time. Whatever, it
how much
happens.
time do you have left?
I'm good for however long.
Okay, cool. Well, then yeah, I'd like to talk about the social media thing because I was telling you about this earlier. Anyone who's listened this far in the podcast is gonna be like, "Oh man, Cliff's a thoughtful guy." You've really talked about a few different topics with nuance and in ways that I found really interesting. Um, but when I was telling Jill, that was, I got Cliff on. She's like, well, let me see his Instagram. She looked, she's like, oh, I don't know, this guy looks, he looks a bit, maybe not controversial, but she's like, is he going to have something to say? I'm like, no, he's a bright guy. He's playing the Instagram game. And like, what I mean is, when you're on Instagram, sometimes you have to push buttons and sometimes, you just put on the meme to kind of see reactions you get, and everything you say is true to what you believe, but there is also that element of playing the game. Um, and it's a tough tension to find because different people have different personalities and different mediums, and there are people all the time when I hear them in podcast form, I think, oh man, I'm thinking some other coaches around, this is a good guy, but then I go over their Instagram and I fall for it. I fall for the bait. They push a button or something like that, and it gets that reaction out of me. And it's an interesting game, an interesting balance. I was just wondering if you could talk about making that shift into Instagram from being like, more of a coach who's been in the game for a long time, and just what you think about, I don't know, balancing social media.
So I'll answer this two ways. From a personal way, my Instagram used to be way more wild when I had nobody paying attention. It was just an avenue to talk smack with my friends and tease each other. It is still mostly that for me. I like every 10th post, I'm just mocking my wife loudly on there. I call it celebrating my wife. That's the key. Don't say mocking, say you're celebrating. So I still think of it as a window into the personality of yourself, if that's what you want to do. My boss, John, he doesn't really show anything other than a professional is at the same time every day. He posts either a workout or an exercise and talks about whatever. And he's got 600,000 followers or whatever it is, right? And it's a very engaged following. So we, in some discussions on business coaching, et cetera, and social media, he says it really well. He goes, the way to get eyeballs on social media, for the most part, is just freak shows and skin. So you think about like really popular Instagram accounts or TikTok, and they're doing crazy feats of strength, something that's insane. Freak show. Right. And that freak show could also be giant bubble butt or like super duper attractive or crazy, showing a lot of skin, thirst trapping. Those types of things seem to be ways to trick the algorithm. For me, I don't really care about my reach because I've always had a company that is the brand that I'm promoting. I'm not promoting myself. I'm just posting who I am. And so I've taken a very like a conscious decision that I'm just going to keep it real. Like even I was teaching it's called Alpha Strong. It's a CrossFit class at Lifetime. I was teaching last night, 11 people in the class, and a new person that has had classes with my wife, who also teaches there. She turns halfway through the class. She goes, "You're the instigator at home, aren't you?" Because my behavior in the class is just telling silly jokes and being goofy while also probably teaching a pretty good class. And my Instagram is exactly how I teach a class. And it's exactly, if you checked out my old blog, it's exactly how I write. I stay consistent. I don't take things too serious. I think it's not fun to do it that way. But I do think that, I've got some experience and some education around it as well. And so I can talk through pretty thoroughly. For people coming up, consistency is the number one thing you can do on social media. So whether it's consistently having hot takes or it's consistently posting kettlebells or it's whatever, the predictability of what you post is important to the algorithm and to your client base, right? Last year I grew quite a bit because I decided, all right, I'm going to sell this kettlebell product and let's just post all kettlebells. And so I kept doing that. And I ran into a hiccup because I was posting kettlebell stuff in this yoga studio barefoot, because I like to train barefoot. And apparently I developed quite a number of fans of my feet that was shared within the very friendly male population that expanded.
You got to pivot. That's what the market wants. Give them more feet.
I should have pivoted directly to OnlyFans for the male market, because I'd be rich right now.
Yeah.
But then I was like, this is getting too much. Like, my DMs are getting too out of control. I can't even look at messages anymore because of stuff that's coming in. I have to block all these inappropriate comments. And so I went back to my standard poke the bear, have fun, silliness, mostly kettlebell stuff. And I use mine as a connection piece with clients and customers that have gone to our certs. And so it's fostering a continued relationship. So it has less total reach, but it's a deeper connection with the people that are actually engaged. If you want a broader scope, I think just being really super consistent so people know what to expect is important. Because anytime people post something different, you'll see unfollow go up higher, because they're like, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for this. And I found that to be the case once I started, posting videos of my wife again. People just, I didn't come here for your wife. I came here for kettlebells. I'm like,
and feet.
You didn't pay a subscription. And feet. I didn't pay a subscription, first of all. So I don't owe you anything. But yeah, that's it. It's like freak show. You got to somehow stop the scroll. Some people do it with just like crazy takes. For me personally, it's just me being me on social media. Like, I'm almost taking the social media original idea that this is a way to interact with friends and acquaintances, and I'm staying true to it. Most people, though, they're looking at it as, is this a business? And how do I do this as a business? I wouldn't do it the way I do it for a business. I would be very specific. Just, here's kettlebell education. Here's kettlebell education. Here's kettlebell education. I would still have a little bit of fun with it, because that's me being authentic. You got to be authentic. But the social media game, it's a wild one. And I'll tell people this, like, because I'm fortunate enough to be interacting with a ton of people that are social media influencers, and the very, very vast majority of people with a lot of followers are not monetizing that followership for anything. They get high fives, internet high fives, and they're still working their regular job because they aren't able to monetize it. So it's this social construct of validation that is not actually monetarily beneficial to most people that have it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm too soft for social media. I'm not hard enough for that game, but I always respect when people put in the time and have fun with it. We're pretty much at time now, but is there anything else that was on your mind, or anything else that you wish you'd said earlier, or if we get off the podcast, you'd be like, oh man, I should have mentioned this?
No, one avenue, I think that one thing I think is really important for instructors and people that are within the profession is to understand where you're getting your information. And what I mean is, you get a lot of fitness coaches that listen to S&C coaches and think that the stuff they are teaching pertains to fitness, and it just doesn't. And the same is true the other direction. The example I'll use is this: for fitness clients, snap downs and working on landing mechanics and jumping is important, because they haven't jumped in a long ass time. And where's the part that people get hurt is the landing. So spending some time focused on that makes sense. But then you'll have the newer S&C coaches. They're being told they should teach their athletes landing mechanics. And I'm like, these athletes don't need that, to be honest, because they're landing in weird ways already. They're getting no stimulus from these little snap down practices. And you have them talking over each other. And so you get this cross of ideas from one camp to the other, and they don't pertain like at all. Another example, and this is, so S&C people, they will say, you don't need to train like your sport while we're training, because they're already doing their sport. So just do the big lifts. And then you have fitness people say the same thing. And I'm like, yeah, but these people aren't doing sport. So I agree, for S&C people, I'm like, yeah, if they're playing and they have all this reactivity in different directions at high speed. Like, yeah, you probably don't need the lateral lunge and explosive stuff as much or at all, because what are the qualities they don't get in sport that you're trying to give to them to balance out their high load, high intensity that they already have? Yeah, trap bar deadlift, row, pull up, bench press, like the basics. That's all they probably need.
Yeah.
That's not me in the gym, because I'm not playing volleyball, basketball, tennis every single week. So yeah, understand the bias and where they're drawing their information from, and does it actually apply to who you're trying to apply it to?
It makes a lot of sense. One of the things I was talking about in public health is, define your population and then define your problem before you try to solve things. Otherwise you fall into all these kind of type 3 errors, or these, where you completely misunderstand what the intervention is supposed to be because you haven't spent time trying to figure out, what the problem is. And I remember, this is, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, where people would always argue about how you squat. There's the squat, and how do you squat? Obviously, they meant the back squat in this case normally. And no one ever bothered to find, it's like, well, there's a high bar back squat, there's a low bar back squat. Volleyball players might learn to squat in a different way because there's a range of motion they want. And then people conflating that with the classic, sort of resting squat that you see in the global South, and people saying this is what your squat should look like. Well, not if you got 150 kg on your back. And that's a really, really good example, because so much of social media is decontextualized. You have this context collapse where everyone's talking to everyone all the time. We have no idea what populations they're talking about. And you pick that one cool thing or that cool idea or that cool soundbite, and you've got no idea whether or not it's relevant to you. Man, that's a really good point. All right. Well, where can people find you? And how can people interact with you?
Clifton Harski, at Clifton Harski on IG is it. I don't do anything else social media. That's enough. I'm trying to stay up with them and my boys. And then for education, get PPSC.com. We got 3 different courses: the functional kettlebell training course, including an online option there. We have our pain-free performance specialist certification. This is how we warm up. This is screens. Ours is an exercise screen, not physio screen. Exercise selection based on the screens, and how to run a first session for clients so that you can sign more people up. And then lifelong performance, which is just how to program all 6 of those characteristics concurrently for your average client that's probably seeing you 2 times a week. So you don't get lost in the sauce thinking that you're going to have 5 sessions with the client. Like, that just doesn't happen that often.
Great. Clif Harski, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise.
Okay, so that was my chat with Clif Harski. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. In terms of points that I thought were really interesting, I liked his opening point about how so many of the screens and assessments that are used in fitness are sort of arbitrary positions that might not have much carryover to real life, and how it's unfair to expect personal trainers to put themselves in the role of a physio or an osteopath or any other kind of specialist to diagnose these things. I like how he's been a part of kind of the movement of getting personal trainers away from that sense that they need to validate their own work by using complicated words. Also, like, he said it a couple different times throughout the conversation, but I like when he said things like, well, just get better at the skill, find whatever's interesting for you, or find something that resonates with you. I found that to be really true as well, whether it's dance or Zumba or CrossFit. If the movement clicks with people, we shouldn't shame them. If it gets people out and moving and building connections, and that's exactly what we need. And then I also liked what he was saying just about this idea that during COVID, I thought was an interesting point when he was talking about how when all the certifications shut down, there are no in-person certifications. It kind of created this void where people were able to explore and redefine how they wanted to use tools like kettlebells. And that's something I'd never considered before. And he just had a lot of good language about questioning what you're allowed to do, and the idea of form being, prescribed from up high. So I think that was one of my favorite parts of the conversation. I also enjoyed when we were talking about social media. I think he has a really good balanced outlook on how to use social media. He's obviously someone who really enjoys it. And take some time on it, but also use it as an opportunity to question some of the ideas and bring information and perspectives to people. So anyway, I really hope you enjoyed the conversation. We've got some good ones coming through in the future, so stay tuned, and thanks for listening.